Why don't you begin by telling us a bit about each of your organizations and also the board you work with. And Virginia, why don't you kick off?
Thank you, Doug. Miami Lighthouse is celebrating 85 years of service from the same location here in Miami, Florida, where Helen Keller and people like Dolly Gamble had the inspiration for Miami Lighthouse to help the blind here in Miami. We have grown significantly to a statewide organization with a national reputation of excellence. The mission for Miami Lighthouse is to provide vision rehabilitation, eye health services, and education to help the visually impaired, to train professionals, and to conduct research with academia. In terms of the size of our organization, the operating budget is $7.5 million. We had 100 W-2s this past year. Of that, about 70 are full-time employees. And we have a lot of independent contractors because our subsidiary is the Florida Heightened Children's Vision Program, which includes a network of about 2,000 optometrists. And so those children in school who fail their state-mandated vision screening are on the free and reduced lunch program, do not have insurance, are referred to our program for a dilated eye exam through our mobile eye care units and prescription glasses. Miami Lighthouse provides services for the visually impaired from birth until its senior years. In addition to vision rehabilitation, we're launching a new program which is providing a preschool for blind 3- and 4-year-old children in a new facility adjacent to us, which will be called the Lighthouse Learning Center. The phenomenal growth that we have experienced when I began our operating budget was approximately $2 million with about 30 employees 10 years ago. Much of that results from the fact that a dysfunctioning board, when I became CEO, became a functioning board, a leadership board, a steering committee board of experts. And we used Doug Eady as a consultant to get the board on track. And I am many days so grateful for the wisdom of our consultant, Doug Eady, because we had so many committees that should not be doing the work of the CEO. If in my job description it says I'm responsible for staff, I'm responsible for the facilities, then we shouldn't be having standing committees related to HR, related to facilities. So we streamlined the committee structure with only 3 standing committees, and those committees report to the board. And so we have a board, a maximum of 30. Right now I believe that the size of our board is 26. And it is a diverse board, both in terms of any definition one would use for diverse. It's diverse in terms of the type of professionals. It's diverse in terms of having, I'm going to call it a consumer. That would be a consumer of our services, and that would be a senior with low vision. It's diverse in terms of having parents of our blind children that we serve on, having the parents on the board. It's diverse in terms of ethnicity. It's diverse in terms of age. And I do want to emphasize in the definition that I would like to use in terms of diverse, you want to have community leaders, community philanthropists, lawyers, accountants, educators, healthcare professionals, because the board for me is my best resource. And it's very reassuring to know that there's expertise on the board. Did I answer your question, Doug?
That's excellent. Thank you for your kind comments, too, Virginia. Yeah, you lead a very different organization and a different board. Why don't you tell us a bit about your situation?
Well, Thank you very much, Doug and Virginia. Congratulations for your 85 years. I do want to one-up you, though. The International Economic Development Council is celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. We were formed in 1926 as the American Industrial Development Council. That organization grew to become the American Economic Development Council. I actually worked for a different organization called the Council for Urban Economic Development, which was formed in 1967. In 2001, those two organizations merged to form the International Economic Development Council. Now, if you want to talk about large boards, you should have seen the board that I had in 2001. QED had a 45-member board. The American Economic Development Council had a 35-member board, and 45 plus 35 yields 80 every day of the week. And frankly, if you wanted to cost yourself votes towards merger, you would tell people you're not going to have a seat on the new board. We decided that that was not a useful political exercise, so everybody had a seat. Now, what are we? The International Economic Development Council is a membership group. We're a professional association, trade group. Use one of those terms, and our members are professional economic developers and frankly, the communities where they practice their craft. They're trying to create, retain, expand jobs, develop tax base, and enhance wealth in the communities where they work. You could compare us to the American Planning Association. You could compare us to the Urban Land Institute, which is the country club for the real estate development world. You know, we fit in that notion of people who work in the public-private partnership. But our goal is to increase tax base in our communities and help people identify with employers. We didn't stay at 80. We decided that our goal was 55 by 2005, and we did drop to 55. But I will tell you, I have never sweated a moment in my nearly 30 years worrying about was my board too large at 45 at QED or 55 at IEDC, or frankly even 80. Because we needed to have a broad constituency. We have communities all over the world, mostly North America and mostly the United States, but they are looking to us as a research body, a public advocacy body, a accreditation and certification body. And in order to achieve that, people need to know that you're making good decisions on their behalf. Frankly, we have had issues of diversity, as many organizations have had. We were probably too white for too long. We actually have a diversity committee every year, and it looks at our diversity from a racial point of view, a gender point of view. We try to represent various regions of the country. Our bylaws require one Canadian and one European on our board. We currently have 3 Canadians. I can guarantee you one of the things that a large board can do is help you sell your organization. You have no problem finding somebody to represent you at the Montana Economic Developers Association or the Mississippi National Association or Association of Counties if they need a speaker. So we are spread around the country very well. Our organization, and I will end here, has a budget of about $6 million. We have about 30 staff. We have a lot of conferences and training programs. And Virginia, like you, when we did have some governance questions, we too used Doug Eady, and he came at an important point because after we did merge, we ended up having too many committees focused on our naval and not enough looking at the big picture, and Doug helped us to get ourselves organized in a way that made my life a lot easier.
Well, thank you, Virginia and Jeff, for this overview. You know, these days you have consultants trotting around the country telling CEOs like the two of you in different sectors, oh my gosh, you've got to downsize your board. You need 9 members or 11 or 13, and otherwise the board's too unwieldy, and so on and so forth. I'd like to hear your gut reaction to that advice. And Jeff, why don't you kick off this time?
You know, Doug, I think what those consultants get wrong is a 7 or 9 person board might make sense for a corporation or a for-profit organization. But frankly, both Virginia and I have, in different ways, important investors in our organization. We have important constituencies that we need to interact with. And having an advisory body or a subcommittee where those people gather is just not the same as having people at the table. And if I started reducing my board, I think we would lose our importance. I would have less people who could help me with political connections around the country. I think I would have less strength at dealing with the many other associations around the country that somewhat feed into IEDC. I frankly think those minimalist board consultants have got it all wrong, and they're doing a real disservice. And Doug, as you know, we had dinner a couple times over the last month, and I was with the American Society of Association Executives, and I don't think there were many people in a very large room who thought small boards made sense for them. I think they had to deal with some of the same issues I do in terms of political representation, thinking about the future of the profession, thinking about a diverse representation on the board, and they would say that that's all balderdash.
Virginia, what's your take? You're at the local level, very different organization. What do you think about consultants going around saying, oh my God, you've got to have a smaller board, and by definition then a less diverse board?
They probably haven't followed your lessons of having a board operations committee that can handle the operations of the board and the relationship with the CEO. And what I mean by that is, yes, I stay in touch with every board member. I like to say 25 to 50% of my job is communicating with the board. But some of that communication might be to develop some relationships, whether that has to do with legislation, health care, whatever the need might be, an elected official. But in terms of the relationship with the board, managing that relationship, managing the board attendance. Why have board members if they're not going to be attending? And so having a board operations committee, which some consultants over the years have called the executive committee, at the Miami Lighthouse, our board operations committee is composed of the officers of the board, president, treasurer, secretary, immediate past chairman, incoming chairman, and the chairman of the 3 committees. So those 8 people have a significant responsibility of overseeing the relationship with the CEO and with the board. And we actually have a board report card on board attendance. And funders often want to know, what is your board attendance? And so if you have a board operations committee that can ensure that the other remaining 20, 30 board members are engaged, but it's a model that one uses, and if you use the Doug Eady model, you're able to have a large board and effectively have everybody be providing a board leadership role, but yet having 7 or 8 people that are your most intimate confidants.
And what you're saying, Virginia, is a bigger board, a board in your range, 30-some, and Jeff, you're in the 55, 60 range, that it doesn't have to be unwieldy if it's structured right. I think that's,
Yes, said that very well. That's what I'm trying to say, Dougie.
and, you know, you both talked a little bit about this, the value of diverse boards, and I know both of you well in your organizations, and you have highly diverse boards. You talked about some of the benefits, but would you like to say a bit more about that and what you get from a diverse board? Jeff, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember. Let me give you a little anecdote from my observation. And not only is IEDC 90 years old, I happen to have now, if I'm still employed on August 1st, I will have been here 30 years. And here is the funny thing that I have discovered over time, at least with our audience or our members. White males will jump up and volunteer or promote themselves, will say, I want to serve on your board. And we could have an 100% white male board without any problems. They are more assertive, and obviously these are gross generalizations. But that doesn't make for a good organization. And so several years ago, we set up a diversity committee because, frankly, the future of our profession is not going to be, 100% white males. So if we go to 1950, that may have been the case. We're now 2016, and it's probably 50% women in the profession, a growing number of minorities, of a whole variety of different backgrounds. And we need to work those people into our committee structure and into our board structure. If I only had 7 seats, I don't know how I would think about, how do we grow more women into the board, or how do we, in the Southwest, in California and Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, Colorado, and even Florida, there's an increasing number of Latino economic developers. We have African Americans who have been, once we started having African American mayors across the country, and we ended up having a variety of strong African American economic development leaders in roles. It is just not enough room to have the type of representation, if you have a really small board, to accommodate the types of things you're trying to achieve. We also have our members come out of 3 areas. They either work for a non-for-profit organization or a university, or they work for a public institution, a city, a county, a state, and we have some private sector representation in our membership, banks, real estate developers, not a lot of them, but and a lot of consultants. How would you even get those various interests on a teeny little board? You wouldn't. And but we had to plan for how did we work, how did we recruit our first African American chair. I can go back and point out how we did that. We have not had a Latino chair yet. We've already got a couple people identified on the board, and it's going to be who steps up and works hardest over a period of time, and watched by their peers to see who would represent us best. It's hard to do that on a really small board.
Thanks, Jeff. You've got a diversity committee at IEDC that's dealing with this question of an ever more diverse board. What do you do at the Miami Lighthouse, Virginia? How have you handled the creation of board diversity over time? What process do you follow?
Well, it's a little easier in Miami because Miami is known as the most diverse city in the United States. So right now the demographics in Miami are something like this: 65% Latin, about 20% African American Haitian, and 15% is white and other. So if you're drawing from the professionals and the consumers that are in Miami, you automatically are most likely going to have a diverse board. So it's more unique in Miami in that it's easy. It's a little different if you're residing in an area where you don't have such a diverse population. So what I feel is important, though, and what's often overlooked is females, and what often is overlooked is people with disabilities, especially with some of the emphasis that this country has on people with disabilities. A couple of examples. Any entity taking federal funds must have an accessible website. That means a website where you can use screen reading software and the blind person can have access to the website. Many people in business do not understand what that means. It means that I should be able to go to the American Airlines website and use it. But the graphics get in the way, and if they don't put text behind the graphics, it's not usable. And so having people that, for example, are visually impaired but are professionals on a board, they can be a great resource regarding some of the legislation pertaining to people with special abilities. Getting people employed. We want to get the visually impaired and the blind off of the government dole and into the workplace. But for a company to understand that their best employee, especially at a call center, and that's why the Marriott Worldwide Call Center collaborates with us, and many of their call center operators are blind. And so one of my own personal pet peeves, having been a very successful executive in my sighted life and continuing to be a very successful executive despite being totally blind, is that when people think of diversity, they often do not think of people that are disabled.
Mm. How do you, and that's a very good point, Virginia, how do you go about recruiting, you might say, community leaders to the Lighthouse Board?
We do have categories of individuals so that we do not all look the same, think the same, act the same. And so because Miami Lighthouse has been around for 85 years and Miami is not that much older, it has an excellent reputation. In terms of Charity Navigator, we're ranked among the top 2% nonprofits in the entire United States in terms of efficient use of donor dollars, in terms of transparency. And so if you've got a good track record And good board members attract other good board members. So once you start having quality people on your board, then they attract other people. And we do have a rotation where a board member is appointed for 3 years and renewable for another 3 years. And after that, they have to go off the board for a year. And sometimes it's kind of sad for me to realize that some of these outstanding people are going to have to go off the board, but it also creates an opportunity for me to think of, okay, who is another excellent replacement? Start nurturing, cultivating that person.
So you have a steady infusion of fresh blood on the board.
Correct.
Great. Now, both of you have talked about the fact that a well-designed committee structure is one of the factors that makes the larger board manageable. Does either of you have any other techniques or approaches that make your relatively large boards manageable? And I'll start with you, Jeff.
So we have 3 committees, and Doug, you participated in the development of our committee structure. We have more committees than that. We do have a governance committee. We do have an audit committee. We have an ad hoc nominations committee that meets shortly every year. And we have a professional conduct committee, essentially our ethics committee. It's a disciplinary committee if discipline is needed. But the real work of the organization is done by a performance oversight and monitoring, external member relations, and a planning and business development committee. One of the interesting things is how we assign people to the committee structure. With 55 board members, that you end up having 17 or 18 people on each committee, which is actually a nice working number of people for a committee. Not everybody's going to make all your committee meetings, so you're going to have a decent representation at each of those meetings. But it's also the case that in any given year, about a third of the committee members are also new because of 2 things. One, after 2 years, we move people to a different committee. And then new board members are kind of randomly assigned to the open seats on the 3 committees. So we end up having a couple people each year. About a third are in their 2nd year, and a number of them are in have finished their 1st year, and some of them are brand new. By the time somebody actually ends up in our chairs to become treasurer or first vice chair or chair of the organization, they will have seen the entire committee structure and likely have chaired each one of those committees as well. So people rising to the chair not only serve in a regular committee role, they probably have chaired them all, which gives everybody a wonderful view of the organization. And as you know, Doug, one of the things that we were experiencing was the same type of micromanagement that Virginia was talking about, and they were only looking at their little niche of the world. We now have everybody looking at the broader organization, and it works tremendously.
Great. Virginia, any closing words about managing your relatively large and diverse board?
Well, the 3 standing committees that he mentioned are the same standing committees that we have, and having those standing committees do the work and having the chairman of that committee report to the full board is a way for the work to be done at the committee level, but to keep the large board informed. And we also do have an audit committee, but they only meet once or twice a year to commence the audit, to conclude the audit, to present it to the board. So I kind of have that in a dotted line outside of those three standing committees. And again, as I mentioned, having the steering committee for the entire organization being the board operations committee is a way to ensure that you have effective leadership from everyone. And so attendance, in my opinion, is very important. We don't want to have what Doug often refers to as a letterhead board member. So if any board member has not attended any meetings for 1 year, and that means the 4 quarterly full board meetings, if they have missed all 4 quarterly board meetings, they know that they will be removed from the board.
So your board meets quarterly, Virginia?
Yes.
What about
Yes.
yours, Jeff? How often does your board meet?
So our board meets 3 times a year.
3 times a year.
Our board meetings are a little more difficult because, for instance, this year our first board meeting will have been in New Orleans. Our second board meeting will be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and our third board meeting will be in Cleveland, Ohio. So somebody has to have travel budget to make sure they can make it to our meetings. We generally believe that about a third to 40% of our board will make it to all 3 board meetings. Another third or so will make it to 2 out of 3. Some will only make it to 1 out of 3. The ones that we focus on, like you, Virginia, are the ones that don't make it to any, or the ones that over a couple-year period only make it to 1 a year. We also have at least 3 to 5, depending upon committee, conference call committee meetings. So we're also looking for attendance not only at board meetings but at committee meetings to support the growth of the organization.
So you both have formal mechanisms for what you might call governing performance management. You're monitoring attendance and presumably participation and things like that. Well, folks, you've heard from 2 of the board's savviest CEOs in the business talking about the value of board diversity and how larger boards can bring significant benefits while being manageable governing bodies. Jeff Finkle, CEO of the International Economic Development Council, Virginia Jacko, CEO of the venerable Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. Thank you so much, Jeff and Virginia, for sharing your wisdom with us today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Doug.
Take care.
Virginia, Doug, thanks.
Take care.